London, a city of secrets where logic meets the impossible. Tonight, Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson step into a world where crimson mist and forbidden rituals threaten to consume the city. What they uncover will test not only their courage, but the very limits of reason itself. Before we begin, don't forget to like this video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe for more thrilling video book adventures. It has often been my lot, in chronicling the remarkable career of my friend Mr. Sherlock Holmes, to feel that the bounds of the ordinary world were stretched by his singular faculty for observation and inference. Yet, of all our adventures, those of the gaslit lanes and the fog-bound wharves, none prepared me for the night when the veil between the commonplace and the inexplicable first stirred before my very eyes. It was a little after midnight. The rain had come on in fine, needling threads, and the glow of the street lamps gave Baker Street the aspect of a stage seen through gauze. I had been dozing uneasily in my chair when the small blue diode of Holmes's mobile device blinked upon the mantel. He glanced at it. He had an aversion to ringtones and preferred the silent language of light, and touched the screen with a long forefinger. "Holmes," said a voice, breathless and close to panic. "It sees me." Holmes's eyes, keen even in repose, were suddenly alight. "Whom am I addressing?" "Lyle. James Lyle, Hargreave and Cole. The bank. I was given your number by a mutual acquaintance. I beg you, come at once. The thing—" The voice faltered, as though the speaker had turned away from the instrument. Somewhere beyond him I heard a faint metallic rasp, like the breath of the wind passing the edge of a bottle. "It has learned my name," he whispered, and then, with a strangled oath, There came a thin, unnatural hiss. The call ended in a silence that felt not empty but occupied. Holmes was already on his feet. "Your coat, Watson. The city. An emergency? Possibly the most peculiar of our time." We found a cab with ease. London has grown swifter if not gentler, and were carried through the damp, glittering arteries of Marylebone into the financial quarter, where glass towers rose like obelisks and the pavements shone with reflected neon. Holmes sat forward, his profile cut in spare lines by the intermittent light. I have known that countenance in many moods, but there was now upon it an intensity edged with, though I scarce dared admit it, anticipation. "You recognized the voice?" I asked. "No, but I know the institution and the type. Mr. Lyle will have kept his life in a series of tasteful compartments, Watson. One of those compartments has burst." The cab deposited us at the portico of Hargreave and Cole, whose sober facade, stone, discreet brass, the modest proclamation of its name, attempted propriety in a district where the nights run long. A night porter, a small man with an apologetic mustache, admitted us after Holmes flashed the briefest glance at the lock. "We had the call," Holmes said. "Mr. Lyle. In his office, sir. He rang me to expect you. Then, Lord help us. There was a smell, if you take my meaning. Show us." The lift bore us up with a subdued purr. On the 12th floor, the corridor gave onto a glass door etched with the words, "Executive Risk." The porter's key trembled in the lock. "Stand aside," Holmes murmured. He entered, and the first breath of that room will remain with me to my last hour. There was no stench of blood, no disorder of violence. The desk lamp spread its circle over papers set with exactitude. A pen laid true upon a ruled pad, a photograph of a smiling woman and a child. So much for Holmes's tasteful compartments. Mr. James Lyle himself sat in his chair, his head slumped slightly to one side as though he merely listened for a far hallway sound. His eyes were open, calm, and quite devoid of life. But it was the air that held me, for against the light, only against the light, there hung a most delicate tincture, as if the room had been washed with a very faint solution of carmine. It drifted and eddied, more suggestion than substance, and when I moved my hand through it I felt no resistance. Not the least. "Good Lord," I said, before I could marshal my sense. "Restrain your exclamations, my dear fellow," Holmes replied, though his own voice was low. He moved with that cat-like exactness which has in the past made policemen take fright and maidservants shriek. Raising a sleeve, he drew the lamp slightly nearer and, without touching the body, leaned to inspect the face and the parted lips. "Observe," he said. "Do you see it?" "I know." "Precisely," he murmured. "One must learn how to look. The light conceals as often as it reveals." I confess that my medical training struggled with the stubborn fact before me. The man bore no sign of convulsion, no lesion or froth of the mouth, no petechiae to suggest asphyxia. His pulse, when I set my fingertips to his wrist, was absent, his skin warm still with the ghost of circulation. He was newly dead, and from no cause that my experience could presently name. Holmes's gaze had shifted to a side table where a cut-glass tumbler stood, the water within undisturbed. He sniffed it, held it against the lamp, and returned it to its coasters with an expression I had seen only a few times, each heralding a turn in our fortunes. He glanced at the floor, at the chair legs, at the sill of the window. He did not kneel. This was not the sort of scene one disturbs with clumsy knees and heavy boots. Rather, he stood and let the room speak. The porter hovered. "May I call the police, sir?" "You may call no one for the present," Holmes answered. "You will lock the corridor door and admit no one but Inspector Lestrade if he should appear. And you will forget, if you can, that you ever saw us here until I permit the recollection to return." The poor fellow swallowed. "Yes, sir." Holmes turned to me. "Watson, you are pale." "It is the light," I said, but that was not honest. A dread, unfamiliar and ungenerous to a man of science, had crept into my bones. It was not the face of the dead that appalled me. It had been my lot, in the service and in practice, to know too well the various visages of mortality, but that thin, almost coquettish tinge in the air, as if an artist had brushed it with the remainder on his palette. I could not account for it, and the mind seldom forgives what it cannot classify. Holmes must have read something of this struggle, for he spoke with uncommon gentleness. "Steel yourself, old friend. There will be more of it." "More of what?" He gave the faintest smile. "Of that which men are trained not to see." He drew his phone once more, flicked its camera and, after a moment's adjustment, captured the room not as our eyes perceived it but as some instrument within could parse the subtle wavelengths of light. He showed me the screen. There, as in a photographic plate exposed to a hidden script, the air blossomed not with mere tint but with a delicate filamentary pattern, as though a breath of cobweb had been blown from the lips of the dead and hung, reluctant to part. "Holmes?" I whispered, rebuking myself for the whisper. "What in heaven's name?" "In heaven's name?" He raised a brow. "In London's, rather." He slipped the device away. "Mr. Lyle was not alone when he died. Nor, I suspect, was he in respectable company. You think there was a person here? Yet there is no disturbance, no?" "Person," Holmes repeated thoughtfully, as if taste-testing the word. "No, I think not a person in the sense that we understand persons. There is an agency abroad in this city, Watson. It is not new. It is not even rare. It is merely hidden." I stared at him. "You cannot mean—" Holmes's eyes, which had until then roved like falcons, settled fully upon mine. I saw there neither jest nor fever but a lucid resolve. "I mean that there exists under the civil architecture of our lives a system of forces and allegiances which has long preferred shadow to daylight. I have had reason to suspect it at intervals for years. Tonight, the suspicion is ended." He looked again upon the dead man, whose open gaze rested now upon nothing that either of us could comfort. Holmes's voice dropped, and the words were, for him, unusually solemn. "Write this night, Watson. Mark it as the hour when our methods must accommodate a broader field. Logic will suffice, if we are diligent in its application. But we must be willing to reason from effects to causes that the polite world denies." He straightened and touched the lamp, narrowing its glow. The scarlet in the air, if scarlet it was thinned as though shamed by the dimness. "Our adversary has made his opening," said Holmes. "We shall make ours. And understand this. If that delicate stain is a signature, then we have crossed, in a single step, from the familiar geography of crime into a province where the map is not yet drawn." In that moment, with the rain ticking at the window and the city murmuring far below, I knew, though I did not then admit it to myself, that my companion and I had crossed a threshold no less decisive than any we had encountered in Baker Street or Dartmoor. For the first time in our association, the unknown had looked directly back. Holmes was not long in setting the room to his purpose. He had always been a master of the swift, silent survey, noting in moments what another investigator might spend hours to glean. Now his movements took on an even sharper edge, as though the strange effluence that hung about the chamber had sharpened his faculties rather than dulled them. "Watson," he said, lowering himself to one knee at the corner of the carpet. "Observe this scorch." I bent beside him. Upon the pale wool, scarcely larger than a man's palm, there lay a faintly charred impression, blackened lines that curved and crossed in a pattern I could not place. "Like a brand," I ventured. Holmes's eyes glimmered. "More like a cipher. Do you see the symmetry? Not random fire, but deliberate form. One could almost fancy the remains of a letter, or a symbol older than letters." He lifted a sliver of blackened fiber with his forceps and placed it in a small envelope. From his pocket he drew a test tube, holding it beneath his nose. "And this?" he murmured. "Do you detect the odor?" I bent to sniff and recoiled. "Metallic, like iron filings, and something acrid besides." "Precisely, a residue most unnatural to the lungs." "Had you noted the lips of the deceased?" "They seemed dry, slightly darkened." "Scorched," Holmes said with quiet finality. The vapor entered him. It was not suffocation, nor poison in the ordinary sense, but something stranger. Something that leaves a rune on the floor and an ash in the mouth. At that moment the door behind us swung open, and the familiar brusque tread of Inspector Lestrade sounded in the passage. He came in, shaking the rain from his umbrella, his countenance set in the weary lines of a man summoned from bed to duty. "Well, Mr. Holmes?" he said, casting a cursory glance at the body. "Another natural death dressed up in panic, I dare say. Heart failure, perhaps. You know the city gents. Work themselves to death and frighten their secretaries with tales of phantoms. We'll have the coroner rule it neat and tidy." Holmes rose to his full height, his lean figure casting a shadow against the desk lamp. "Heart failure, Lestrade? You astonish me. If you will be so good as to look at the carpet there, you will find a far more curious explanation." Lestrade bent, squinted, and grunted. "So someone dropped a cigar. A cigar that burns in perfect concentric curves?" Holmes retorted. "No, Inspector, the matter is less comforting. You may label it as hysteria if you wish, but London has acquired a murderer who does not condescend to the ordinary tools of his trade." The inspector sniffed. "And I suppose you'll tell me next that fairies were at work here." Holmes's smile was thin. "Not fairies, Lestrade. Something far less whimsical and far more practiced. But the question is not what you believe, but whether you can afford not to believe until more men fall." Lestrade harumphed, clearly unwilling to pursue the line. "Very well. Have it your way, Mr. Holmes. But I'll wager the coroner proves me right." As the inspector turned to summon his men, Holmes leaned close to me, his voice low and urgent. "Take note, Watson. When officialdom closes its eyes, it falls to us to open them wider. This scarlet mist is not done with London." He slipped the envelope with its charred fragment into his coat, his gaze sweeping once more across the chamber. His expression, though calm, carried the unmistakable flame of pursuit. "The game, my dear fellow," he said softly, "has acquired new rules." By the following afternoon, Holmes had already sifted through a formidable mass of information regarding the late Mr. James Lyle. His methods, which often seemed to me more akin to conjury than reason, had once more borne fruit with astonishing speed. We sat in our Baker Street rooms, the drizzle pattering against the window panes, when Holmes pushed aside the detritus of the morning papers and fixed his keen gaze upon me. Lyle Watson was not merely a banker. He was a man of leisure with tastes most unusual. He belonged to a certain club. "There are dozens of such clubs in London," I observed. "Indeed," Holmes replied, "but few whose names recur in the footnotes of coroners' reports. Mark this. In the past year alone, 3 men, each ostensibly well, each within the prime of life, have been found dead under circumstances which puzzled physicians but troubled no juries. Each man was a member of this same society. He tapped his long finger upon a sheet of vellum. At its head was embossed the image of a shrouded figure in scarlet, and beneath, in gilt, the words, "The Scarlet Veil." "A secret society?" I asked. "A dining club in the eyes of the world," Holmes said dryly. "Its premises are somewhere in Clerkenwell, though the exact address is withheld. Its members speak little of it, but those who do speak mention esoteric rites, candles, chants, the language of forgotten ages. A harmless affectation, say some. Yet when men die with scarlet vapor in their lungs, I find little humor in affectations." At that moment, Mrs. Hudson entered with a small tray, on which lay an envelope, heavily sealed. "For you, Mr. Holmes." A lad brought it and said it was urgent. Holmes broke the seal with the flick of his knife. Within was a card, written in an elegant but firm hand. "Mr. Holmes, the pursuit of your present inquiries places you in grave peril. For your own sake, and that of your companion, abandon all thought of the Scarlet Veil. A friend." Holmes gave a short laugh. "When the enemy counsels retreat, Watson, one may be certain the road lies forward. You think this friend is connected with the club?" "I think," Holmes said, rising and pacing the room, "that our banker stumbled too close to the inner circle of this society. His death bears the stamp of ritual. These runes and ashes are not random, no more than their secrecy is accidental. And consider the name, the Scarlet Veil. A veil conceals, scarlet reveals. What is hidden must be glimpsed only in a particular light. That, my dear fellow, is a philosophy of murder." He paused at the window, his profile dark against the graying day. "Tonight we go to Clerkenwell. There is more than one veil in London, and it is time we looked behind this one." That night found us in Clerkenwell, a district whose narrow streets still bore the stamp of older London, though neon signs and shuttered cafes lent it a modern guise. Holmes walked with that purposeful stride of his, hat drawn low against the drizzle, eyes darting from alleyway to upper window as though each shadow held a ledger of secrets. We halted before an unremarkable facade. A tall brick building with no signboard, its windows opaque, its door bearing only the number 47. A faint thrum seemed to pass through the stone itself, too subtle to call sound, too steady to be mere imagination. "This is the place," Holmes murmured. "It looks deserted," said I. "Then you must trust not the eye alone, Watson. Look here." He drew me closer to the threshold. "Focus not upon the door, but the air about it." I did as he bade, squinting through the lamplight. For a moment I saw nothing but the wavering rain. Then, there it was, a ripple as of heat rising from summer stone, though the air about us was chill. "Good heavens!" I breathed. "What is it?" Holmes's face was sharp with intent. "A barrier, an artifice. To ordinary eyes it is nothing. But strain the gaze and one perceives a distortion. Whoever enters this door is screened from the world beyond." As we watched, the door opened from within. A figure cloaked in dark cloth, hood drawn low, stepped into the street. In his hand gleamed a small object, an amulet of obsidian, catching even the lamplight with reluctant fire. For an instant, the shimmer about the doorway pulsed as though acknowledging his passage. Then it stilled. Holmes's hand tightened on my arm. "Note the talisman, Watson, the key to the lock." The hooded man turned down a side street and vanished. Holmes's eyes gleamed with that dangerous excitement I had come to know too well. "Now, stand steady." Before I could protest, he stepped forward and pressed his palm against the air where the shimmer lay. There was a sharp recoil. His body jerked as though struck by lightning. He staggered back, teeth clenched, a flash of pain in his eyes. "Holmes!" I cried, grasping his shoulder. "Are you hurt?" He drew a deep breath, his features pale but composed. A jolt, nothing more, but enough to confirm the presence of a ward, a line of defense invisible to those untrained. "They mean to keep their mysteries within." "And you would enter?" Holmes's lips curved in that wry smile which never boded ease for either of us. Naturally, for what is veiled is precisely what must be unveiled. But not tonight, Watson. We have touched the curtain. To tear it requires preparation. He straightened his coat and looked once more at the silent doorway. The Scarlet Veil, indeed. London conceals wonders, my friend, wonders sharp as razors. Let us be very careful how we grasp them. We had scarce returned to Baker Street and shaken the rain from our coats when Mrs. Hudson informed us, in tones half apologetic, that a lady of unusual manner awaited Holmes in the sitting-room. Holmes's brows arched. Unusual manner, Mrs. Hudson? She would not give her name, sir. Only that you would wish to hear her warning. Holmes shot me a quick glance, the spark of interest already alight in his eyes. Show her in. The woman who entered was of middle height, her bearing composed, though her eyes held the fixed brilliance of one accustomed to peril. Her garments, dark and plain, carried faint traces which Holmes's gaze instantly catalogued. The dust of chalk across her sleeve, faint scorch marks upon her fingertips, and the metallic scent of some burnt resin. She inclined her head, her voice low but resolute. Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson, you should abandon your investigation at once. Holmes leaned back in his chair, fingertips pressed together, studying her as though she were a specimen upon a glass slide. Abandon it? That is rarely my habit, madam. May we know to whom we owe this urgent counsel? My name is Celine, she replied. Nothing more need concern you. But the matter in which you have entangled yourselves, the Scarlet Veil, does not forgive trespassers. Already it has marked you. If you persist, London itself may pay the cost. I could not refrain from exclaiming, then you admit it exists? That what we saw in Clerkenwell was no delusion? She turned her gaze upon me. You saw a fraction of their art. Enough to brush your companion's soul, though he hides the wound. Holmes's eyes narrowed, though his voice retained its dry composure. Ah, you note the after-effect of my brief contact with their barrier. Very observant, madam. I should be gratified, were the tone not so melodramatic. Mock if you will, Celine returned. But know this, the Scarlet Veil are not charlatans with candles and chants. They are siphoners. They draw upon that which binds life to flesh. What you call mist is the vestige of men's vitality, stolen for a purpose you dare not imagine. Holmes rose, crossing to the fireplace, where he stood outlined by the wavering flame. On the contrary, madam, I have no choice but to imagine it, and to dissect it as I would any cipher or crime. Whether their tools are pistols or pentacles, the principle is the same: cause and effect, motive and consequence. And until I see the end of it, I cannot desist. Her lips tightened, as though she had foreseen his answer. Then know you walk into their circle willingly, and once within, there is no escape but at their pleasure. Holmes turned, the lamplight gleaming in his eyes. Madame Celine, I thank you for your candor, yet you have told me only what a dramatist would choose. That danger lies ahead, that the foe is formidable. Very good. Danger is the air in which I live. As to the foe, I have yet to meet one that cannot be measured. Celine's gaze softened for the briefest instant, as though pity touched her steel. Then may all that watches over men preserve you, Mr. Holmes, for you will need more than logic when the veil draws close. With that, she turned and departed, leaving in her wake a faint scent of charred herbs. Holmes, after a silence, gave a short laugh. Watson, I believe we have just entertained a witch. I shook my head in wonder. And you dismiss her words so easily? Dismiss? By no means. Every syllable she spoke is evidence carefully weighed. But I dismiss the superstition. What she calls siphoning, I shall call extraction. What she names curse, I shall name method. And when one strips away the costume, Watson, even sorcery must reveal its machinery. He lit his pipe and leaned into the smoke. Yet I confess, the machinery here promises to be of the most singular kind. It was not many days after our strange visitor's warning that the matter burst into sudden and dreadful prominence. I had been reading the morning papers at the breakfast table when Holmes strode in, his dressing gown flaring behind him, a journal crushed in his hand. "Watson, the Scarlet Veil have shown their hand in earnest." I looked to the headline, "Mysterious Collapse of Member in Commons Chamber." "Good heavens," I said. "Sir Edward Hatherley dead in his seat?" "Dead in his seat," Holmes repeated grimly. "Witnesses report no struggle, no sound, only that a faint red vapor issued from his lips before he fell forward. The entire chamber saw it, though few understood. You and I understand." We hurried down to Westminster, where the great hall echoed with the hushed voices of officials and the hurried steps of attendants. Lestrade was there before us, his face pale beneath the brim of his bowler. "This is beyond all reason, Holmes," he muttered. A man of 40, sound as a bell, drops in the midst of a speech, and with that damned color hanging in the air like a signal flag. Holmes crouched beside the fallen member's bench, his eyes scanning the woodwork and the carpet. He drew from the floor a few grains of dull gray residue and slipped them into a vial. "The same as before," he murmured. "A metallic ash. The breath turned into matter. Tell me this isn't the work of some secret society with sorcery at its beck?" Lestrade whispered, half to himself. Holmes looked at him coolly. "Call it sorcery if it comforts you, Inspector. I call it a pattern. And every pattern has a flaw." Just then a junior clerk, trembling and ashen, approached us. "I was nearest him, sir," he stammered. "Sir Edward, he was speaking of a bill, nothing unusual." Then he froze, as though listening to something none of us could hear. His eyes went wide and the lad could say no more. Holmes placed a hand lightly on the boy's arm. "You saw enough, my lad. Did you mark any stranger near him? Any object out of place?" The clerk shook his head helplessly. Only that when it was over, a man in the gallery slipped away. Tall, cloaked, I thought him a visitor. But now I wonder." Holmes's eyes sharpened. "Cloaked, you say? And carrying aught? A chain, I thought. A pendant, gleaming dark. Obsidian again," Holmes breathed. He turned to me, and in his voice I caught a note of suppressed urgency. "Watson, it is no longer private bankers and hidden chambers. They strike in Parliament itself. The city will be theirs to plunder unless we are swift." Lestrade wrung his hands. "And what in heaven's name am I to tell my superiors? That witches stalk the benches of the Commons." Holmes straightened, his figure severe against the vaulted chamber. "Tell them what they will believe, Inspector. Meanwhile, leave the truth to those willing to pursue it." As we left that somber place, Holmes's face was as hard as chiseled stone. "Mark my words, Watson. This is escalation. And escalation is always the herald of intent. The Scarlet Veil prepares for something greater, and we have precious little time." It was late on an evening thick with fog that I found myself walking homeward from a patient's bedside in Kensington. Holmes had remained at Baker Street, poring over charts of symbols he had sketched from the banker's office and the chamber of the Commons. Though I had grown accustomed to danger in his company, I confess I felt a peculiar unease as I walked alone through the lamplit streets. More than once I fancied I heard a second tread, measured and muffled, that ceased when I paused. My pulse quickened, but I told myself sternly that nerves had little claim over a soldier. Yet as I turned into a narrower passage, I was seized at once by a chill, as though all warmth had fled the air. A tall shape detached itself from the mist, a cloaked figure, hood drawn low. In his hand swung a pendant of black stone, catching the dim light with reluctant gleam. What do you want?" I demanded, forcing a steadiness I did not feel. The man raised the amulet, and instantly the air thickened about me. A faint crimson haze curled from the ground, rising to my lips and nostrils. My chest convulsed. I gasped, and the mist seemed to enter me, burning cold as it filled my lungs. My knees weakened. I clutched at the wall, vision blurring. Holmes," I croaked, scarcely able to shape the word. Then, through the fog, came the swift, sure stride I knew so well. Holmes burst into the passage, eyes aflame. his hand striking the amulet from the figure's grasp with the ferocity of a hawk upon its prey. The stone clattered to the ground, and at once the crimson vapor dissipated like breath on a mirror. The assailant fled into the night, vanishing before pursuit could be given. Holmes dropped to his knees beside me, his hand firm upon my shoulder. "Watson, speak, man. Are you harmed?" I fought for breath, every inhalation a blade. The air, it burned inside me. Holmes's jaw clenched. "They meant you for sacrifice. My dearest fellow, I should never have left you to walk alone." His face, usually a mask of iron, was naked now with guilt. "To strike at me through you, that is their tactic. And it has near undone me." I managed a wan smile, though my chest still heaved. "You came in time, as ever. Another moment, and I fear I should have been beyond your help." Holmes pressed my arm, his voice low and hoarse. "Watson, you are more to me than 1,000 cases. If they touch you again, by heaven, I shall tear their veil to ribbons." Never before had I seen him so shaken, nor heard such fervor in his tone. For the first time since our long partnership began, I perceived in Holmes not only the relentless machine of deduction, but the raw beating heart of a man who had nearly lost his truest friend. We returned to Baker Street in silence, save for Holmes's occasional glance at me, as though to assure himself I still breathed. When at last I lay upon the settee, he sat beside me, hands steepled before his lips, eyes darker than the storm outside. "This is my lowest hour, Watson," he said quietly, "for it is I who have brought peril to you. Yet in this shadow lies also the clue we most require. They have revealed themselves, and in so doing, they have erred." The following night, as I still convalesced upon our settee, Holmes paced the room in a manner that betrayed his torment. He had scarcely spoken since my collapse, save to murmur questions about my breathing or pulse. His guilt pressed upon him like a stone. It was then that Mrs. Hudson, in a voice edged with disapproval, announced, "The lady again, sir. Says she will be heard, whether you wish it or not." Celine swept in before Holmes could reply. Her presence seemed to bend the lamplight, her eyes glimmering with that unsettling brilliance I recalled too well. She regarded me briefly with something like concern, then fixed her gaze on Holmes. "You see now," she said, "they marked your companion. You cannot call it coincidence." Holmes, arms folded, met her stare. "Coincidence I never countenance, madam. Nor do I grant the word supernatural. There is always a system, only hidden from ordinary sight." Celine stepped closer, lowering her voice. "Then let me speak of the system. The Scarlet Veil siphons vitality itself. The mist you have seen, scarlet upon the air, is the breath of life drawn from its vessel. Not poison, not disease, but essence itself, stolen to power a greater design." I shifted uneasily. "Greater design? They seek to call forth an entity older than this city, older than England herself. An intelligence that feeds upon the force they harvest. Already they have tasted Parliament. What, think you, will be their next ambition?" Holmes's eyes sharpened, but he said nothing. Celine spread her hands. "You cannot dismantle it with reason alone. You must see their rites as you would see a cipher. Symbols aligned, timing precise, gestures as letters in an alphabet. Treat magic as language, and you may yet undo it." Holmes's lips curved faintly, though his voice was grave. "At last, madam, you speak in my dialect. A ritual as a code, an incantation as a cipher, yes, that is comprehensible." He drew a notebook from his pocket, scribbling lines with rapid precision. "The scorch marks in the banker's office, the ash in the commons, the pendant's geometry, they are elements of a sequence, not random terror." Celine inclined her head. "Now you begin to perceive. Logic is your weapon, Holmes. Wield it not against men alone, but against their shadows." Holmes stopped pacing, his tall frame taut with a new resolve. He turned to me, his eyes alive once more with that keen fire I had feared dimmed. "Watson, we have been groping in mist, but at last the pattern takes form. These deaths are not ends, they are fuel. And like any engine, fuel may be interrupted. If we break the sequence, we halt the machine. "And if you fail?" Celine asked quietly. Holmes's gaze did not waver. "Then London burns. But I do not intend to fail." For the first time in many hours, I saw in him not the guilt of a man burdened, but the sharpened determination of Sherlock Holmes reborn. The days that followed were filled with a feverish labor such as I had seldom seen, even in my friend's most consuming cases. Our sitting room at Baker Street became a veritable workshop of symbols. Holmes had covered the table, mantel, and even the walls with sheets of paper scrawled in his fine, rapid hand, circles intersecting, runes refracted into patterns of geometry, fragments of chant transcribed like ciphered text. Celine had left us with diagrams, strange angular designs traced in chalk upon vellum, smudged with ash. To me they were indecipherable, mere grotesqueries. To Holmes they were a puzzle, and no puzzle had ever resisted him long. "Look here, Watson," he said one evening, his eyes gleaming in the lamplight. "Do you see how the runes form a progression? Each symbol corresponds not to a word but to a ratio. When aligned, they produce intervals of sound and gesture, much as a score directs a musician." I leaned over the paper, bewildered. "To me it is gibberish." "Just so," Holmes replied briskly. "But to them it is a grammar. Consider how a chemist, ignorant of Latin, might still explode a retort if he mixed reagents in the right sequence. Here, the reagents are the breath of life, the motions of hand and voice. Their ritual is no different from an equation. Given these inputs, one produces that output." He snatched up another page, where he had drawn the rune I had seen scorched into the banker's carpet. This, Watson, was not decoration, it was the first term of their series. At the Commons, the residue provided the second. The amulet furnishes the third. A series of extractions building toward climax. His hands moved swiftly, jotting figures, crossing out, redrawing. "But note, their system relies upon timing as precise as any astronomical calculation. If one disrupts the interval, the effect collapses." "You mean," I said slowly, "that you could counter it? Break the ritual?" Holmes's smile was thin but fierce. "I cannot conjure, Watson, but I can calculate. Their sorcery is but another form of mathematics dressed in mystery. And mathematics has no respect for secrecy." He strode to the window where the fog pressed thick against the glass. "I admit freely, my dear fellow, that never before have I extended my logic into such a theater. But the principle holds. Every shadow is cast by a substance. Find the substance, and the shadow loses its terror." I saw then the return of that old light in his eyes, the very flame that had kindled in cases past when he unraveled the knotted skein of some crime. Yet now it burned with a broader scope, as if he delighted not only in the chase but in the chance to test reason against the very unknown. "Watson," he said, his voice low but charged, "we shall attend their ritual. We shall face them in their sanctuary. And at the precise instant, we shall turn their engine back upon itself." Though my heart quailed at the thought, I could not but feel a stir of awe. For if any man might pit logic against sorcery and hope to prevail, it was surely Sherlock Holmes. It was upon a moonless night, damp with autumn chill, that Holmes and I made our way to the husk of St. Anselm's, a cathedral long abandoned to dust and pigeons. Its spire, jagged by war's neglect, loomed black against the starless sky. Holmes had traced their sequence of symbols to this very place, convinced that the Scarlet Veil would enact their culminating rite within its hollowed walls. We stole through a side door whose lock yielded to Holmes's deft touch. Inside, the nave was dim save for the flare of many candles. They stood upon the flagstones in concentric circles, each flame guttering though no draught passed. Between them moved the cloaked brethren, chanting in low cadence, their voices blending like the hum of a hive. At the center, upon the altar, lay the great obsidian amulet, its facets swallowing the light. From it drifted the now familiar crimson haze, thin tendrils curling upward like the smoke of a sacrifice. Holmes pressed my arm, his eyes keen. "Mark their intervals, Watson. Each gesture, each note, it is as I calculated. But see how the final stroke approaches. We must act at the precise instant. My heart thundered as I whispered, "And if we misjudge? Then we are both corpses before dawn." Holmes returned coolly, though his lips were set in grim determination. The leader, taller than the rest, raised his hands. His chant grew louder, the others answering in a swelling chorus. The air thickened, and I felt once again that dreadful chill creep into my lungs. All about us the mist coiled, not pale this time but a deep scarlet, as though the very blood of the city had been drawn into vapor. Holmes slipped from our shadowed alcove, his steps soundless upon the stone. I followed, though every fiber urged me to flee. He approached the altar with a swiftness so precise it seemed rehearsed. At the moment when the chant reached its height, he seized a heavy iron candlestick and, with a blow measured to the heartbeat, shattered the obsidian amulet. The effect was instantaneous. A sound, neither human cry nor natural thunder, tore through the cathedral. The crimson vapor writhed like a thing wounded, then burst upward, vanishing into nothing. The cloaked brethren staggered, their chant breaking into confusion. The leader screamed, clutching at the fragments, but the shards turned upon him as if alive, embedding deep within his flesh. He shrieked once more before collapsing, the mist that had sustained him draining into the stones. "Watson, this way!" Holmes called, his hand gripping my sleeve as the cultists fled in terror, their ceremony undone. We stumbled back into the night air, the great doors of St. Anselm's slamming behind us as though the very building had exhaled its burden. For a moment we stood beneath the ruined spire, my breath ragged, Holmes's eyes alight with a fierce, weary triumph. "It is done," he said simply. "The engine is broken." The dawn found us once more in Baker Street, weary in body yet far from rest in mind. Holmes sat with his dressing gown drawn close, the ashes of a dozen pipes strewn across the hearth. I, for my part, still felt the chill of that crimson vapor in my lungs and shuddered whenever memory set me again amidst the chanting throng of the Veil. It was near 8 o'clock when the door opened softly, and Celine stepped within. Her countenance was pale, as though she too had borne the strain of the night. "You have broken the rite," she said. "The Scarlet Veil is scattered, its leader consumed by his own folly. London breathes free, for now." Holmes regarded her with that cool, hawk-like expression I had so often seen when his mind was already several moves beyond the present board. "You speak as though the city were a patient granted but a temporary reprieve." Celine inclined her head. "Because it is so. The Scarlet Veil was but one society. There are others. Some covet power, some merely survival. But all guard their secrets, and all now know that you have torn aside the curtain they draw over men's eyes." I could not restrain myself. "Then we have made enemies yet more dangerous?" Her gaze met mine, steady and somber. "Yes, Doctor, and allies as well, should you choose them. The hidden world is a labyrinth. Once entered, there is no turning back." Holmes leaned forward, his long fingers steepled. "I did not choose the labyrinth, madam. It presented itself in my path, and I have walked where logic led me. If others should emerge from the shadows, they may find I am not so easily cowed as their brethren." Celine's lips curved, not in mirth but in recognition. "So you will continue?" "Of course," Holmes replied. "The world is one, not two. To divide it into natural and supernatural is a fallacy. There are only causes and effects, veiled and unveiled. And unveiling, Celine, is my trade." She gave a slow nod, then turned to depart. At the threshold she paused, her voice softer. "Take care, Sherlock Holmes. You have been noticed, and what notices you may not always be flesh and blood." The door closed behind her. For a time only the rain upon the window spoke. Holmes rose, stretched his tall frame, and turned to me with something of his old energy. "Watson, what do you make of it?" "I make of it," said I gravely, "that we have entered into dangers beyond the realm of man's comprehension." Holmes smiled faintly. "Beyond comprehension, perhaps. Beyond deduction, never." And with that he set about clearing the papers from the table, as though by the mere act of tidying, he might reassert reason's dominion over the wild forces we had faced. That evening, when the tumult of the day had at last subsided, Holmes and I sat by the fire in our familiar sitting room. The lamplight glowed softly upon the rows of books, the cluttered shelves, the violin leaning in its corner, all the homely tokens of our long association. Yet I knew, as surely as the flames burned upon the grate, that neither of us regarded the world outside quite as we had before. Holmes had been silent for some time, his gaze fixed upon the shifting embers. At length he spoke, his tone uncharacteristically low. "Watson, I have long prided myself upon the sovereignty of reason. To me, all phenomena were but puzzles, awaiting only the proper lens through which to perceive them. Yet this last week has pressed me to the edge of that creed. I have looked upon forces that do not yield readily to the scalpel of logic." I leaned forward. "And yet you prevailed, Holmes. You unraveled their scheme where others would have quailed." He gave a short laugh, tinged with weariness. "Prevail, yes, for the moment. But note what has changed. I once believed all mysteries belonged within the natural order, if only we possessed the wit to trace them. Now I perceive that the natural order itself is wider than we suppose, its boundaries less secure. Logic remains my weapon, but it must be tempered with humility before the unknown." He reached for his pipe, then set it aside untended. It is a strange confession, is it not, for Sherlock Holmes to admit that even he must learn anew? "Not strange," I answered quietly. "Merely human." Holmes's eyes softened for an instant. He rose and stood at the window, looking out upon the rain-slicked street, where the gas lamps blurred into mist. "London wears many veils, Watson," he said. "Some woven of fog, some of lies, and some of stranger fabric still. We have torn aside one scarlet veil, but I fear there are others, black, silver, unseen, waiting to be lifted." I joined him at the window. "And when the next is drawn?" He smiled, that keen, familiar smile which had heralded so many of our ventures. "Then, my dear fellow, we shall lift it. For though the shadows lengthen, still there is deduction, and still there is friendship. With those, even the darkest veil may be pierced." Thus ended our first encounter with the hidden world beneath modern London. I have set it down with all the fidelity of memory, knowing that greater trials surely await. But whatever powers stir in the unseen, one truth remains constant. Sherlock Holmes will face them, and I shall stand at his side. You've just listened to an original Sherlock Holmes urban fantasy adventure, where mystery collides with magic in the heart of London. If you enjoyed the story, please hit the like button, leave a comment with your favorite moment, and subscribe to join us for more immersive audiobook-style dramas every week. Until next time, keep your eyes open, for the shadows may hide more than you think.